Hey Crossway students, great to be with you again as we continue our journey through the book of Philippians. We're almost nearing the end, but it's been a joy for me, and I know it's ministered to my soul in this last few weeks, and I hope it's been an encouragement and a help to you as you seek to grow in your love for Jesus and obedience to him. Today we're going to be doing Philippians 4:10 through 20, so almost to the end, verses 10 through 20. And if you haven't taken a moment to pray, read, observe, ask, apply, and share, go ahead and pause the video right now before we dive into kind of the text. Pause the video and spend some time working through that, 15, 20 minutes or so, taking notes of your observations and all those things, as long as you make sure you first pray and ask God for help, and then we'll jump back in together. Well, it's good to be kind of getting to the end of this book and kind of hearing the end of Paul's letter to the church in Philippi. And so there's a number of observations I made as I was reading through this. This is not a portion of the letter that I read regularly. It's not like a go-to portion of mine. So it's good to kind of read it with fresh eyes and just think about some of the things that were going on. And so just a couple of things that I wrote down as I was making observations is a couple of times in this section, Paul kind of recounts to the church in Philippi their love for him. He just talks about his gratefulness for their love towards him. In verse 10, it says, "You have revived your concern for me." And then in verse 14, it says, "Yet it was kind of you to share in my trouble." There's this, just one anothering that Paul is just recognizing that the people in this church of Philippi, these Christian, these men and women truly loved him and cared for him, and it was just a blessing for Paul as he was traveling and as he was also in prison. He just knew that they were for him. And what a great thing for a man like Paul to have, a kind of a sending church like the Philippians who loved him so dearly. And I love this phrase. I wrote this down because it's just a unique phrasing that you don't kind of read regularly. It says in verse 10, "You were indeed concerned for me." So once again, that same phrasing of love for him, "but you had no opportunity." And I wrote that down because it's interesting. It just seemed to share with us that Paul was just recognizing their love for him from afar, but many times they didn't have any way to show it until they were able to kind of send this gift that they talk about a little bit later, the gift they sent with their friend Epaphroditus. So I just love that phrasing because it's a little bit unique. You cared but didn't have the opportunity. I just like that phrasing a lot. And then we get to kind of this, he talks about his contentment. Basically content in all things. I'm going to read this verse for you because it's a verse that is often misquoted and used out of context. Philippians 4:13, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." How many times have we seen that verse plastered up kind of in a Christian school or on a sports team where people were saying, "I can do this with Christ and all things through Christ who strengthens me," or just used out of context. When he's writing this, he's talking about, I can be content in the ups and the downs, when I have nothing, when I have everything. Paul is saying, this is what I can do with Christ. Christ can strengthen me to be content in all circumstances. So students, let me just ask, can we take a moment, is that a phrase that you're willing to use right now? In this season where things might be taken away from you, are you willing to, with Paul, say, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I will be content. I can be content. I can be joy-filled right now in this season that I'm in. That's a challenge for both me and for you guys as well. So I love that phrase. I love this verse. Make sure we use it in its right way, that it was meant to be used. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And in this context, it means I can be content. If we kept going, some of the things that I also continued to observe and write down, it said that they were the only church kind of early in his ministry to give to him. And I love that kind of partnership. They were the ones who got in on it early and said, hey, we're going to support you. We love what you're doing in the gospel, and we are behind you. What a cool picture of this local church. And then it talks about being well supplied. So he has been taken care of, and particularly this gift from Epaphroditus, actually from the Philippians through Epaphroditus, has been a part of that, making sure he is well supplied. And so what a beautiful picture of a local church caring about ministry of the gospel in other areas that they would send money and support in a time of need. And then he kind of closes this as he's talking about the riches that he received. He turns this phrase kind of on its head, and he says, God will supply all of your needs, church in Philippi, for the glory of God, is basically what he says. And so I just love that picture. Even as Paul received from them, he received and kind of turned it back towards them and said, just so you know, God will take care of you for his glory. It was just a beautiful kind of a picture of a church giving faithfully to Paul, Paul as a shepherd reminding them that God is caring for their very souls, all for the glory of God. When I got to the ask portion, because there's other things in there, but when I got to the ask portion, I wrote this question down because Paul actually says in these verses, in verse 17, not that I seek the gift, but I seek the fruit that increases to your credit. So I was just honestly asking, what does it mean to say, not that I seek the gift? Because it seems like Paul was in need. And so a gift would have been helpful, and it was helpful as it came. So I was like, what does that mean? Well, I think it really means that he didn't want them to think he had gotten rid of or forgotten about this idea of humble, sacrificial service. And so he wasn't just trying to seek a gift and seek help for the sake of himself. He wanted them to remember humble, sacrificial service, but he also was acknowledging to them that you are blessed when you give. And in fact, we would do well to learn from that. I think not just as we give financially, but as we sacrifice of our time and energy for those around us, we are blessed as we give. I think that's how God works in the lives of people. And so when I think about the application for me, I think number one, it's like we've heard this before, this idea of contentment. Being content in this season when things are not as I would like, things aren't going as I wish they would. I just want to encourage both of us, you and me, to be content. We can do all things through Christ who strengthens us, namely, be content in the ups and downs, with plenty and with little. And also, it was just a reminder for me, even though things are hard and concerning, I want to still be generous with my money as best as I can. So I want to save well, I want to spend well, but I also want to make sure we're being generous as a family and thinking about those things. I hope you guys are encouraged once again as we work through this. Tomorrow, we're going to do the final 3 verses in this chapter, and we'll spend some time together doing that. But I hope you also took some time to share what you're learning with someone you love, a friend, a family member, someone you feel like is in need of that encouragement or help. Take some time to do that. Students, I love you. Grateful for this time. We'll talk with you again soon.